Welcome to The Politics People. My guest today is a British TV presenter, he's a medical doctor, and for 8 months he represented North West England in the European Parliament as a member of the Brexit Party. I'm talking today to Dr. David Bull. Thank you so much for doing this.
Absolute pleasure. It's lovely to talk to you.
Now, so are you conscious of the impact that you've had on British politics, the part you've played on the change in British politics?
Yes, I am. I tell you what is really interesting is that I think, and I don't want to sound too big-headed, but I know that actually what we did changed history. It changed British politics for good. And I think the Brexit Party hasn't had the recognition it deserves. And I can go into detail about why that is. But without us, we would be on an extremely different trajectory than the one we are on. And lots of people say to me, well, why did you, as a doctor, as a TV presenter, get involved? And the only reason I got involved is I was so angry that democracy and the democratic result of the election of the European elections was not being upheld. And that's the reason I stood, and that's the reason I won. And as I say, the rest is history.
So we've got a lot of listeners actually in the United States. Let's go right into the granular, the nitty-gritty of why. Why was this? What indeed was the Brexit Party? I mean, I said that, you were just in the European Parliament for 8 months. Why only 8 months? It's like a lot of people still don't even know the machinations that went on in the last few years in the UK.
Well, it's been the most incredible soap opera, really, here in the UK and in Europe. So essentially, let's go right back to what happened, which is David Cameron called a referendum. And this was basically Britain. Let me just put this into context. Britain has always had a very uncomfortable relationship with Europe. And that is partly because we're an island race. It's also because I think we do things differently. And someone said to me the other day, in the UK, we presume we can do something unless we're told otherwise. In Europe, they believe they can't do anything unless they get permission to do it. We're very different mindsets. But essentially, David Cameron called a referendum. And the reason he did this was not some sort of altruism, but it was to try and to unite the Conservative Party, which was the governing party at that time. Now, when he called that referendum, he never once believed that he would lose. He wanted people to say, OK, we're going to stay within the European Union, and that would be fantastic. And that way he would keep his backbenchers quiet. He would unite his party, and on they would go. History, however, decided otherwise.
Do you subscribe to See, this is my theory on it, and this is why I like talking to people like you, because you were actually there at the coalface. You're saying that he didn't expect to lose. That's absolutely the case. But I also don't think he expected to be in a position to have a referendum. There's that argument, or that conspiracy theory, I guess, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I do believe this one holds water, that it was because the Cameron government was in coalition with the Lib Dems, and the Lib Dems were absolutely going to veto any kind of referendum they were going to veto an in-out referendum anyway. That going into that 2015, it was 2015, wasn't it, that Cameron got a majority? Are you there?
Yes, I'm listening. Attentively.
It's just so rare I had to question it. That in 2015, he was assuming that he was going to be in coalition again, would put an in-out referendum to his coalition partners, the Lib Dems. They would say no. He could turn around to you and people like you and the British public and say, I tried. You see, I tried, but I am being thwarted at every turn. And what happened was there was such a kind of antenna went up in the British public that, oh my God, this is the referendum vote, that they voted a majority for David Cameron. Therefore, he was hoisted by his own petard. He was held to having to have a referendum. Does that hold any water?
That may have been a factor within this, but I have no doubt that David Cameron did this for his own reasons. He knew the Conservative Party has always been fractured over Europe. You have to look back to when we joined in the 70s to see the way the Conservative Party has never united around Europe. We've been very uncomfortable bedfellows. We don't even have the same currency. We're sort of in. Many of my European friends say, well, you have 1 foot in and 1 foot out. So you take, you're part of the European Union, but you choose to have have a different currency. And in fact, us not having the euro was probably one of the best things that we ever did. But essentially, he then put it to a referendum. The government paid for a leaflet to go to every single British household extolling the virtues of why we should stay within the European Union. And the British public, in their infinite wisdom, said, actually, no, thanks very much. Now, what happened was over 30 million people voted. More than 17.4 million people voted to leave. It was the largest ever democratic vote seen in this country. So what was extraordinary was the turnout and I think the passion. People suddenly, and you're right, people suddenly thought, crikey, we can get out of this hideous club. And that's what they did. And what the articulate intelligentsia of Westminster didn't realise was that ordinary, normal, working people felt they had once had a voice for a change. And that is where our votes came from. It was people, normal people with normal jobs who said, we've had enough, we want out.
Have you ever I was talking to Douglas Carswell yesterday, and I was again just spitballing my theories. We had that referendum 2016, and then it's taken 4 years and a couple of general elections, a change of government, a complete change of direction for politics in the UK, just to implement the will of this largest democratic act ever in British history. Do you think that the fact that the establishment was seen to be so Machiavellian for the last 4 years has actually helped win over perhaps the swing voters in this area? People who were like, it's a maybe, I don't really care either way, I'll go with whatever the consensus is. Do you think that hearts as well as minds have been won over now because they've seen all the gymnastics that the establishment has gone through in front of our very eyes to prevent the implementation of that democratic result?
For sure. And that is, so what happened was that essentially, you're right, 3 years of absolutely diddly squat. And essentially, the Prime Minister at that time, Theresa May, kept saying no deal is better than a bad deal. It was all rhetoric. It was all nonsense. And that's when people like me said, hang on a minute. And in fact, someone said to me, you're in a position of influence. And I was so angry about what was going on. And they said, well, if you're so angry, you should do something about it. And that's why I stood. And what Nigel Farage did so brilliantly was he galvanized that anger. We did rallies in football stadia to thousands of people. Political rallies in the UK have never been like in the US. And so this was the first time that, and Nigel and Trump are friends, and I think he learned a lot from being over in the States. And so we were doing these massive rallies. And what happened in that election, in the European election, was no one believed the Brexit Party would win. No one. And we became the largest single party in the European Union. It was extraordinary. 1 minute I was a normal TV presenter, and the next minute I was a member of the European Parliament. And so suddenly politics shifted on its axis. So suddenly we had power. And when I joined the European Parliament, which is a whole nother ballgame, and for people who don't, in the States who don't know how this works, only the European Union could manage to have two parliaments. There isn't even one building. One is in Brussels, one is in Strasbourg, and essentially every month it all decants off to one of the other one of the other locations. The whole thing is an absolute circus, and it is a veneer of democracy. Essentially, I won't go into it now, but essentially, what struck me from being there was that everything I thought about the European Union and the European Parliament was true, but it was worse. Woo-hoo! It wasn't democratic in the slightest. And you're right. So what's happened? If you poll people now, actually, the number of people voting for us to leave has gone up. And the reason it's gone up is because people have suddenly thought, hang on a minute, we had a vote, people voted to leave, and we now should leave. And we haven't left. We still haven't left. And we're now at a very pivotal moment, and people like me. So the reason that you mentioned earlier, why were you only there for a few months? Well, because we managed to shift the agenda so dramatically that Boris Johnson, or they called a general election, Boris Johnson then jumped on our bandwagon saying we will then leave and uphold the democratic vote and we will get you out. And he won a landslide. He has 80 majority MPs in the House of Westminster. And so therefore, he said he would deliver, and the Brexit Party obviously we went onto the sidelines. And I can tell you now that we are sitting, we are watching, and we are waiting. And if the Prime Minister does not follow through with what he promised, there will be trouble.
It does, from your position, does it look like he is actually following through at the moment? I'm very, very optimistic for the way things are going and the language that's coming out of Number 10.
Well, of course, Michel Barnier has been the chief negotiator for the European Union, and their stance has been incredibly forceful and objectionable, in my humble opinion. They want everything, and they essentially are now changing tack. David Frost is the new negotiator from our side, and I like him. I think he's been extraordinary. Today, he's just issued a statement about the latest round of talks, and he said, look, the fact is, we don't see eye to eye. There are huge issues, particularly amongst things like the level playing field, fisheries, for example. The European Union wants access to British waters. Well, I'm sorry, they're British waters. That's the whole point. We campaign to be a free, independent, self-governing country. And if we do not deliver on that, then we haven't upheld the mandate that the people gave them. So I think David Frost is absolutely right. And I think what's happening in Europe is the European Union are now starting to panic because the transition period that we are in at the moment runs out in December of this year. We can, by mutual consent, agree to extend by 2 years. Now, Boris Johnson would be absolutely dead if he did that. And so if we are to extend, then we have to do so by the end of this month. I believe this month or next month. But essentially, this is now crunch time. So David Frost is saying all the right things. He's basically said, look, we want to be a free, independent, self-governing country. We want to do a trade deal with you. But the EU have played hardball. They are originally saying, well, you know, the best you'll get is a Canada plus style deal. And now they're not even offering that. And the thing is that we are geographically linked. We are in Europe. But the European Union doesn't seem to want to recognise that. Now, the fact is that we, I think, have the upper hand. And if they don't want to play ball, we'll take our ball and we will go elsewhere.
And the UK has already begun its trade negotiations now with the United States, I understand. Didn't it just start the other day officially?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So I think that cat's out of the bag already. So I just look, many a slip twixt cup and lip, etc. I think it really is just that final agreement of the what do they call it? The trade agreement that we have with the EU, the future trade agreement. That is now the only stumbling block that could be delayed by the establishment or by any kind of shenanigans to in some way try and keep us in there by a thread in the hope that hearts and minds will change in the future. But like I said, it looks to me anyway, and you're right near the epicenter, it looks that it is going to go through. I mean, like I said, the language coming out is very much, I mean, Boris is now saying, no, we can't wait till January. This needs to be sorted out by the autumn.
I don't believe it. I don't believe it till I see it.
Exactly. Well,
I've been around long enough to see how this works. The political machinery is at work. Make no mistake. These arch remainers keep popping up. Tony Blair pops up. There is obviously a concerted effort to try somehow to extend the transition. And now they're using coronavirus as an excuse to say, well, we haven't had time to have meetings in person. And, obviously doing things by Skype isn't the same. And so you mark my words, they will try everything they can to extend this transition. And people like me have to keep up the pressure on the government to say, no, you promised we would not extend past December 2020. And David Frost is saying exactly that. So that is good. And Boris Johnson is sticking to that at the moment. I will say one other thing. I think the government has something up its sleeve because, weirdly, coronavirus has been a great leveler. One of the biggest sort of accusations the Remainers levelled at us was that if we were to leave with what we call a clean break Brexit or leaving on WTO, World Trade Organization terms, is that we would suffer sort of decimation to our economy. Well, guess what? With coronavirus, we have. And so every other country has. So, in fact, if you were to pick a time where you would change the way you trade with Europe, the time I'd pick is now.
It's very good point. I mean, what you touch on there for me is the presence, the ever presence of the Brexit Party continues to be it's in the waiting in the wings should some finagling be done at the last minute to try and overturn this result, because you're kind of you're always going to be there to hold the process, whoever's controlling the process, to account. The Brexit Party is now, I mean, it's a party, but it's a movement and a pressure group all wrapped into one. You're going to hold somebody's feet to the fire until we are definitely out.
Exactly. And I think the really fascinating thing, and someone said to me right at the beginning of this, is that when you look at my colleagues, we come from across the political spectrum. We come from right, from left, from centre, and that's extraordinary. And so what people have said is, this isn't about right and left. This is about right and wrong. And that is unusual. I have never been involved with such a cross sort of spectrum, political spectrum organization such as this. So we were a political party. We are a political party. We don't hold any office at the moment because we essentially, I mean, the extraordinary thing was I campaigned to get rid of my own job. And we were very successful. So I lost my job because I'm no longer an MEP. But you're right. We're sitting on the sidelines. We're watching. We're waiting. And make no mistake, we're in contact every single day, all of us still, more than once a day. And I've spoken to Nigel about what we would do if things don't go the way that the public expect them to. And we will be ready.
Why do you think that Farage doesn't get the credit for Brexit? There's been this big furore this week, or the previous few weeks. We're talking at the beginning of June 2020. In the previous few weeks in the UK, there was a huge furore about Dominic Cummings, and we don't need to get into why he was. But they kept calling him the architect of Brexit. Okay, I am just like a train spotter on this whole thing. It's all Farage. It's like it was all Farage. The architecture, the methodology of how to actually use parliamentary politics against the governing party to force its hand to get a referendum, the creation of the Brexit Party, etc. For me, let's say this is just it's almost a rhetorical question. How is it that now Dominic Cummings, who was obviously very effective, but it sort of gets the credit as being this kind of being the eminence grise of the entire Brexit success? It's just like, why is Farage almost written out of history by the establishment?
Well, because they hate him. Nigel's campaigned for over 20 years to get out of the European Union. And Dominic Cummings was head of Vote Leave. And in fact, it's a complicated Venn diagram. And many of us sit in various things. I was involved with Vote Leave, for example. And actually, there's a very good movie being made about Dominic Cummings and the slogan and how that campaign evolved. But essentially, Nigel has been the one underpinning it for the last 20 years and campaigning vociferously to get us out. And I'm a great believer that actually one day he will get the recognition. He doesn't get it now. He's seen as the bad boy of politics. I think he's changed. When he was head of UKIP, it's a party that I probably wouldn't have been involved with, he said diplomatically. And so, the Brexit Party, as I said, its great power was that it was across the political spectrum. And it felt right. It felt important. And when I was campaigning, and in the general election, I campaigned in the Northeast, people would come up to me and cry and say, thank you. For the first time in my life, someone is fighting for me. And that is incredibly powerful. And what happened with the general election is, before we went into that general election, we, the Brexit Party, went to the government and tried to do a deal, because we knew that we would take that red wall, that the Labour voting, working class Labour, formerly Labour voting seats. And Cummings was having none of it. Johnson was having none of it. And it was a gamble on their part. And they pulled it off. They won. And they managed to get rid of those red wall. But the thing is, as you've seen with coronavirus, these areas aren't being represented. They're not being looked after. And I think many of those MPs could disappear. Now, if that happens, then obviously British politics could have a seismic shift yet again. But there was no way. Essentially, the bottom line was Boris Johnson did not want to do any sort of deal with the Brexit Party, or at least he didn't want to be seen to be doing any deal with the Brexit Party.
Yeah, no, that's. I can sort of understand it from their point of view because I think that if you are this, you know, Boris took over from Theresa May, he was able to certainly present himself as the Brexit Party wing of the Conservative Party, if you like. I can imagine that it's not going to play very well if he was. It was a bit like, when the Lib Dems or the SDP and the Labour Party, or what was the Social Democratic Party, the SDP.
SDP, yeah.
It's that House divided thing. I can understand the Tories for December 2019 being like, no, we do not need any help from anybody else. Thank you very much. I think.
Well,
that,
ironically, we did help them because you see, in Sedgefield, where I fought, I took the Labour vote, squeezing the Labour vote so much it allowed a Conservative member of Parliament to be elected, which would never have been possible. So we helped them, but not in a formal pact.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. It's just like I think that it's. I can see that their logic of certainly not appearing to need any assistance from anyone. It's just the thing that goes with being a Conservative. I think they like to present that we are the natural party of government and we do not need assistance from anybody else.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, I think, it will be. Let's look at what happens next. If we stay firm, and if Frost continues in the way he's doing, he will have our blessing. Because what he's saying is right, which is, look, we want to do a comprehensive trade deal with Europe. You're our closest geographical partner. Many of us have, European roots. I love Europe. I just don't like the European Union. And the fact is that we have to have a good deal. And if we don't get a good deal from the European Union, then we will walk away without a deal. What is also interesting is, as you've seen, the tone from Barnier is changing because they're frightened. They're frightened that we are going to leave and there is going to be no deal. And already they're asking for money. They're asking for a coronavirus sort of fund to pay for those countries that have been hit the hardest, like Italy and Spain. But, the point is that we don't want to pay any more money to an institution that we're not part of. And I don't think it's fair. It goes back to that whole American, no taxation without representation. We have no say now in this transition period, and yet we are still paying. And that has to stop.
This is my issue. This is my problem with this. And by the way, this actual show's about you. I want to get on to how you got into the Brexit. Literally the casting call, if you like, for the Brexit Party, because that was a new approach as well. But I want to come into that in a second. But just on this one point before we move on, this is the problem as I see it, though. The Brexit Party, or formerly UKIP, anything Nigel Farage was involved in, always had they could always run and get seats in the European Parliament because that was done on proportional representation.
Correct.
So they always had that. They always had the funding, if you like, but certainly the platform and the status. I mean, after YouTube 2004, Farage's speeches from the European Parliament being put up on YouTube, that just changed the momentum of the whole agenda. Anyway. You guys walked out because we left, I think January the 31st, 2020, was it? Something like that?
Yes, exactly right.
So we officially leave the European Union. So the Brexit Party doesn't attend any longer. It has no seats in the European Parliament. Should the unthinkable happen and there becomes a campaign to keep us in, and just before we actually quit, something happens. How can the Brexit Party, with 4.5 years to go till the next general election, exercise any kind of pressure now on the UK government? It used to have that EU base, the EU Parliament base, and the funding from the EU Parliament, etc. And now it doesn't have any kind of seat or leverage. How would it exercise influence if this should come to pass?
Well, put it this way. I think the UK government knows we're breathing down its neck. And many Conservative ministers that I know have come up to me and said, thank you so much for pushing and keeping the pressure on because it's allowed our job internally to be so much easier. So it's sort of much more subtle than that. And I think what will be worrying Boris Johnson is he has said umpteen times we will not extend the transition period. And if he is seen to then extend the transition period, if we are seen to be spending more money, and imagine Barnier wants to extend for another 2 years. Can you imagine what the British people are going to say to that? You know, paying an organization that we don't want to belong to whilst we have absolutely no voting capability within the European Parliament, as you say, you know, is utterly bonkers. And right now, we need the money in the UK. We need to invest that money in infrastructure, in making sure the regions actually regenerate, in making sure the City of London provides that income that we need for the rest of the United Kingdom. So actually, Boris has got a lot of levers at the moment, and I think he just needs to stay firm.
Then what was the straw that broke the camel's back with the UK's relationship with the EU or its position in the EU that made you actually want to put your head above the parapet and actually become actively involved?
I mean, you know, over the years, it's been loads of things like sovereignty. The fact is that we seceded sovereignty from Westminster to basically, as far as I can see, an unelected European Commission. So the way it works is you've got the European Commission, which is the heads of state, and you've got the European Parliament, which sort of rubber stamps what they decide they want to do. And then we got given all these diktats from Europe about the way that we needed to carry on. But actually, that's not the reason I got involved. And as I said right at the beginning, I only got involved because I'm a campaigner. And we had the vote. I wasn't even really that involved. I mean, I was involved in trying to get us out, but it wasn't even that. It was the fact that democracy was being denied. And I think, you know, Britain is a bastion of democracy. We've exported our democracy around the world, including to the United States. The US whole political system is based on the UK. The fact is, you have two houses. It is exactly the same as ours. If you go to India, we built all of the democratic processes in India, for example. And if we can't get our own houses in order here, then that's outrageous. And so, you know, I did it and stood up for democracy. And I have to tell you, I've lost loads of friends over what I did. I lost jobs over what I did, you know, and certainly within television, I can't think that I'm particularly, you know, in demand because it is a Remain-leaning establishment. And you only have to look at the coverage coming out of the BBC at the moment, which is, in my humble opinion, not impartial in the slightest. And everything that, you know, they're pushing this Remain agenda. And they need to be very careful because the majority of people voted to leave. And the BBC and the way it's funded will come under increasing scrutiny. And I know the government is looking at that. And in fact, there's a new Director General who's been announced today. And it will be interesting to see if the BBC changes its editorial tact, because it is, and certainly when I worked there, it was seen around the world as the most impartial broadcaster, and it needs to ensure that it remains so.
Yeah, I mean, from watching the BBC from the US, it's actually shocking to see the way it's been reported. I thought, to be fair to the BBC, during the actual campaigning period for the referendum in 2016, I thought they were very even-handed. Actually, it's only
well, they have to be by law.
No, they do. But again, you know, they do sly winks as well. I mean, I don't think they were, you know, in the lead up to the 2019 election, they were governed by the same law. But I think that they definitely were biased towards Jeremy Corbyn, for instance.
I mean, even if you look at the coverage this week, you know, I know this from writing news headlines, but the way you write an introduction, you know, sort of frames the debate. So the fact is, you know, Nissan announced that it was shutting a Spanish plant and pushing all those jobs into the UK. But that was never reported by the media. But the Nissan has said that they are cutting the workforce. And of course, that is then reported. Well, you know, you can't do that. You have to report both sides of any story.
Yeah, all I was going to say was it's shocking that the moment the result gets called in the referendum, again, it's an establishment thing. I think, you know, they were assuming that we were going to lose, but they were going to jolly well make sure that there could be no recriminations from Auntie Beeb in the future. They were absolutely resolutely even-handed during the campaign. The minute we won. And it is we. I'm not a journalist. I'm terribly biased. They went absolutely bonkers and have continued to be bonkers ever since. I mean, quite openly.
Right.
So
Well, one other point that I want to make is that, I don't know why we're so obsessed with Europe, because actually our balance of trade with Europe is diminishing and has done over many, many years. Britain is an outward looking global country. The fact is we're, in the Commonwealth, the largest organization of countries in the world. The fact is we're in Five Eyes, we're in NATO. All of these things are really important. And I think we've forgotten how important these are. We don't want to be in this subservient federal superstate of Europe. And the fact is, actually, I think the point about Europe is that, fine, if you want a single European state, a super state, which is fine, then you need a single currency and you need one government. And you want to get rid of all national governments. And the EU has now said that is pretty much what they're going for. Well, you know what? We don't want to be part of it.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's again, none of my business really. It's just like, this is not. We're here to talk about you. But the only thing that I would have lived with the EU quite happily, but the one rule that killed me every single time, and this is not immigration, borders, or anything. It was then you touched on earlier, the EU Commission.
Yeah.
The Commission is the only body that can initiate legislation. It's to be voted on. So
that's right.
From you were in the EU Parliament. Basically, my wife's a communist and we're in America and stuff, and she just assumes that I'm just like horribly right wing on absolutely everything. But over the years, drip by drip, she just kind of asks questions about, so what's the problem with the EU? And I just say, well, you can't. They elect the dog catcher pretty much in America, as you know. It's like everybody gets elected. But the Commission is the only body that can initiate legislation to be voted on in the EU Parliament where you sat.
That is right. Sorry, I just want to correct something I said earlier. I think I meant the European. So there are three things. There's the European Council, which is the heads of state.
That's right. They're the heads of state, yeah.
European Council. Then you've got the European Commission, as you say, unelected.
Appointed. They're appointed. They're
appointed that decide the laws and what they want. Yep. You're right. And then people like me who were elected are allowed to vote on whether we like what they come up with. That's it.
And that's it. And as I said, Americans cannot get their head around this at all.
I don't think we can.
No, this is the point. And this is why I think they made a big mistake not calling Article 50 the next day. If they'd have brought in, my theory is, if they'd have had Article 50 triggered, and this was the technical clause that basically began the end of our relationship with the EU. It gave it a 2-year negotiation period. But anyway, that was the starting pistol of leaving the EU. But if they'd have triggered Article 50 the day after the result from the referendum, I think we'd have been back in by Christmas myself. I think that people were in such a state of shock.
That's interesting.
And I do genuinely think it's one of those, what's the name of it? It's like the Heisenberg effect. It was the very fact that people could see the experiment then unfolding in front of their eyes for the next 4 years.
Well, yeah, and also I think just going back into history, in 1973 we joined a European common market. This was a marketplace for goods and services. And somehow we've been subsumed by all of these treaties like Maastricht and Lisbon, which we didn't vote on, by the way, into a federal superstate. And so we never voted for it. And we suddenly ended up in this position where we're being dictated to by this unelected body in Brussels. And that is not on. And we're not having it. And and that was the bottom line.
I know.
And we're just not having it.
It's extraordinary. Like I said, I'm in America. And when you put it like that to people, because like I said, the minute it happened, as I said, my wife, communist, and most of her family, they just don't understand what I'm talking about at all. They don't agree with me. And they just couldn't see the problem. They thought it was like leaving NAFTA or something. They thought it was a trade agreement, No,
it's nothing like.
And when you actually go through the actual layers of bureaucracy and how much power these bodies that you have you've ceded sovereignty to, Americans even the most left wing has a visceral reaction against the idea of an external body controlling the United States in any way at all.
Well, it's very much, the analogy would be that Britain sets the laws in the United States. And that, that was the whole point of Boston, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So essentially we're going through what the US went through, which is that, hang on a minute, we want to take back control. And that was the slogan that that won the Vote Leave campaign, which was taking back control.
Yeah, again, see, I love you like a brother, but I don't agree with any of that. I honestly think no slogans worked. I don't think any of it happened. Any of it worked at all. I think they could have just announced a referendum, had no campaigning for leave at all, and they'd have still won. It's Farage, Farage, Farage every single time.
I'll let him know. I'll let him know
It,
what a fan you are.
no, because he's a great strategist. I think his
Oh, he's
whole,
very bright. He's
yeah.
super bright. And what it is very funny, actually, I was laughing to myself the other day about 3 degrees of separation because, you're meant to be connected to people, by 7 people, aren't you?
I thought it was 6.
And
I thought it was 6 degrees, but
6 degrees of separation, whatever it is. But I was thinking, obviously I know Nigel very well, and Nigel knows Donald Trump very well. And I was thinking, well, that makes me 2 away from Trump, which is which is not a position I would ever imagine I would be in as when I qualified from medical school.
no, but you like Trump though, please.
Um, we see things slightly differently over
Where?
here. Let
What?
me
What?
say.
What? Name one.
Well,
Name one.
let me just. Well, look. So I have argued on television. Actually, if you look at Trump's mandate, what he said he would do, he's pretty much achieved. And
Exactly.
again, by the way, that was one on a slogan, "Make America Great Again." That was definitely the campaign that won that. I think look, someone needs to take that Twitter account off him. It's too dangerous. He tweets the most ridiculous things.
No,
And
no, you're wrong. God,
I'm not wrong.
I love
I'm
you,
telling
but
you
you're
from a
wrong.
global perspective, and we are the closest ally to the United States, and even we sometimes think, "Oh my goodness, what's he doing now?" The point is that what does shock me actually is that I thought the United States was this sort of great panacea of a great melting pot. I've always thought that, and yet what I've seen recently, and particularly the police brutality that's going on in the States, and obviously all of these protests, makes me incredibly sad. And there's obviously work to be done. And I think Trump, is obviously a formidable force. I think there could be a bit more humility, and I think sometimes he needs to listen to the softer things that are going on. I don't think this has been handled at all well.
Interesting. Controversial views there from Dr. David Bull. Everything you just said then, literally the opposite for me. But look, this is what I love is the fact that the Western world has been shaped now by Donald Trump and Nigel Farage. I just think it's absolutely great because these were people that had been studiously ignored and forgotten. They represent the majority, but they had been actively othered by the organs that we give, the
Right.
institutions that we give power,
And I'll tell you one other thing that struck me when I lived in the States, is that I thought America was one country, and it's not. It's 50 countries.
50
And that's what.
countries. Yeah.
And I don't think people in Europe understand that. And what Trump did so cleverly was that he galvanized middle America. And actually, the bicoastal regions of LA and New York think very differently to the way that middle America thinks. And in fact, when we were talking about Brexit, my friends in LA were talking about Lexit, LA's, LA's leaving the United States, because it is a very different place. California is a very different state to, say, Utah.
Absolutely.
But I mean, I still think Trump could win again.
Oh, he will win again. Oh no, he's already won.
I wouldn't say will. I said could.
No. Listen. I'm telling you, he's won. He's already won. It's just. It's like it's. The thing is,
a week is a long time in politics. Remember,
he's not in politics. This isn't political. This isn't political. This is a revolution. I swear. It's already won. The thing is, if the headlines match the reality, I'll tell you again my theory. All right, and we'll talk on November the 4th and see if it's come to pass. My theory is, I'm like one of the only people that was able to vote for Trump and Brexit. By the way, it's like a weird thing that I got
double whammy.
I got my citizenship just before, and so Trump was the first president I could actually vote for. I think that there were a bunch of people that supported Trump in 2016 but couldn't vote. Oh, sorry, didn't vote because they didn't think he had a chance of winning, but they sat at home with the hat on. And and this is why he only got the sort of 70,000 majority. He's turned into a very conservative president. I think he definitely has divided opinion sharply, but I think that has galvanized his base and all the people that would support him, but just wouldn't go out to vote, because voting in America is more of a palaver than it is in Britain. By the way, I mean there is like
Is it?
well, you get like a thick exercise book. Seriously, of things to vote for, and
Right.
all these clauses and all these. So it's actually quite a kind of rigmarole. But anyway, the
Well,
point.
I think what's going to define this will be the scale of bounce back. I saw today 2.5 million jobs have been created in the US, and that's extraordinary actually, and has defied the markets. And if that continues, Trump is out of the woods.
Anyway, the point is, I'm obviously just a super fan of his. But what I really
Well, I'm
like.
looking forward to an invitation to the White House, obviously.
Ditto, ditto. That's
Well, I keep
podcast is
saying to
about,
Nigel, when you go over, can I come?
carry your bag. I know. It's
Yeah,
just,
can I carry your bags, please? I want to meet the Donald.
but it is. I just think it gives great hope. Farage started this. I mean, you can't imagine those days of the early 90s. This had no chance of success. He had absolutely no chance of success, and he didn't need to do it. And he just went and ploughed this furrow that, like, people just thought he was an eccentric.
Well, it is extraordinary, and it kind of comes back to the beginning of this when and I do reflect, and I think, when I'm lying in my coffin, and I think as you reach middle age, you think, well, what have I actually done? What have I achieved? And I can honestly say that I was one of those people that changed British history.
Absolutely. Just before I let you go back to saving lives, which is you have actually re-registered as a doctor now for the coronavirus.
I have, yeah,
you?
yeah, for coronavirus. So I'm fully registered with the GMC, and I've got my license to practice back. So, actually, I mean, I could talk about this, but the government strategy here. But the fact is, we were already seeing at least we'd reached the peak before we even instigated lockdown. So we are now the other side of it here in Britain, thankfully. And Europe is coming out of lockdown now. I'm desperate for us to. And I'm also watching the US with enormous trepidation because I'm due to fly over on the 18th. But right now, I believe, as of March, that foreign nationals have to self-isolate for 14 days. And if that's the case, I'm not coming.
Yeah, I think it's different with different countries. I had a client of mine flew in from South Korea like a week ago, and they didn't have to because they've got testing at the airport. So
well, maybe someone could tell me whether I can actually come.
Yeah, listen, I'll figure it out.
Oh, could you look for me?
I'll have a look. Yeah,
Yeah, that would be very, very good because also I'm not sure. I'm due to be in LA for 3 days before I head into the Middle America. But I've heard there aren't any bars open, that there are no restaurants open. So and there's a curfew. So it sounds a barrel of laughs.
After talking to you today, I'm going for my first proper fancy meeting, and the only place that's open is International House of Pancakes. So there you go. That's where I'm holding.
What's wrong with that?
Nothing wrong with that. They do a lovely breakfast. I'm not knocking it. So I just want to get like.
Oh, you see, I miss LA. Actually, I have to say, I do miss LA.
You should, because it's paradise. It's the greatest place in the world to live. It's like it's like.
It was a very good place to lose a lot of money. Let me put it that way.
Why? What are you doing? Well, how do you lose money?
I drove around in a fancy blacked out Range Rover. I lived the lifestyle. I went to celebrity parties. I spent a lot of time in Soho House doing absolutely nothing. It was fabulous.
I just want to get a snapshot of the Brexit Party, you joining it, because again, this was another exercise in democracy. It was just they took applications from anybody and everybody could apply to join. I'm just going to sit back and let you just tell the listeners what the process was. The bat signal went up to join the Brexit Party to stand in these European elections that were happening in 2018? Was it 20?
Where are we now?
I know, where was it?
Yeah. No, 20. No,
19,
because hang on a minute.
2019.
Yeah.
Gosh,
yeah, it was only last year.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So, the European elections were fast approaching. Now, I was actually approached because people knew I was political. I'd previously stood to be a member of Parliament for the Conservative Party, and they knew that I was angry. I'd spent a lot of time on television just saying why I felt that this was a terrible democratic result. And so people said to me, well, if you think this, then you should stand and you should be. Try and become a European Parliament candidate. And it was very funny, actually. It's a very funny story because I'd been on holiday, and where had I been? Cuba. And I flew back from Cuba, and I was in my underwear, unpacking my bag, and really, really jet lagged because I'd flown in overnight. And my phone rang. And so I pick up the phone, and this voice says, "Hello, David, it's Nigel Farage." And I nearly fell over the balcony because I wasn't really expecting it. And he said, "I hear you're thinking of standing." And I'm like, "Yes." And then he said, "Where do you want to stand?" And I said, "Well, it would make sense for me to stand in my home seat, which is in the east of England." And he said, "No, I want you in the northwest because I think you will have great traction there. You've worked there. The people will like you." And the rest is history. And then I started campaigning, doing these football stadium talk. It's massive. I mean, honestly, like campaigning and rallying like I've never, ever done in my life. Um, it was like being Madonna. We were in, we had the staging, the lighting. It was extraordinary. People. It was very American. It was very American, with people slapping you on the back and cheering and a sense of real optimism and that the country was going to change. And I didn't think I could win, and I did. And to go from a standing start of no European MEPs to becoming the largest single party in the European Parliament of any country was extraordinary.
And so you were there, like I said, for these 8 months, and like I said, I'll let you have your life back. What was that final day like? What was
Well, the whole thing was an absolute farce. I mean, I'm going to write a book about it because, you have that, we talked about this, that, we've got the European Commission that decide essentially the law, and then we vote on it. And even if you speak, you can only speak for 1 minute. I mean, the whole thing's an absolute travesty of democracy. But anyway, don't start me on that. That final day was extraordinary because we got up really, really early. And then we did a march. We carried the Union Jack, the Union flag, the flag of the United Kingdom, out of that European Parliament. I have never seen so many press in my life. We gave a speech, or Anne Widdecombe gave a speech outside the European Parliament. We then got in taxis and went to the Eurostar, and all of us travelled back to London. We did a flurry of interviews in London, and then I went to a pub in Westminster where I met loads and loads of Brexiteers. And then there was a huge party outside the Houses of Parliament with bands, a huge stage, a huge lighting rig, and Union flags everywhere. And obviously the extraordinary sense of optimism and, being triumphant because we'd achieved something that people said we just simply couldn't do. Interestingly, Boris Johnson wanted nothing to do with this party, and they refused for us to hold it in other places. So we did this. The Brexit Party did it yet again, and we were the ones that then put on this show that celebrated the fact that we left the European Union. And I went to a drinks party then in the Guards Club in London, and I think I finally got home at about 7 a.m. exhausted. And I think the weirdest thing about all of this is I think, and I can't prove it, but all of our MEPs then got coronavirus, and we think we picked it up in the European Parliament.
That every anecdote should end that way. That's I think I got coronavirus. What about that final day actually in the Parliament though? Didn't you have a ceremonial standing up and leaving the chamber?
Yes, we did. So we had to vote. If you remember, we had to vote as the European Parliament on the agreement that had been reached between the United Kingdom and the European Union, and it was extraordinary. It's like the biggest game show of my life. And so the way it works is we have cards, and you put your card into the electronic voting system, and then you either voted for it or against it. And so you put it in, and your hand is covered so people can't see how you vote. And then we all looked up at the scoreboard. There's this electronic scoreboard, and the whole thing went green, apart from a few red lights. And then there was this stunned silence, and my jaw dropped open because I realised we'd done it. We were leaving, and at which point people started applauding and people started crying, and then people sang "Auld Lang Syne," and we left the European Parliament.
Oh, it's just such a great hairs on the back of your neck kind of story. It's fantastic. Listen, you're part of history, Dr. David Bull. I can't thank you enough for deigning to talk to me today. It's been an absolute privilege. Thank you so much for your time. And again, like I said, thank you for your role in all this.
Pleasure. Well, now I'm looking for the next campaign. What am I going to do now? So watch this space.
Campaign for Trump.
We'll talk about that.